Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us at the Global AI Bootcamp 2022 for today's session. Now, I'm your host Leon Gordon, and today we're going to take a look at an introduction to machine learning in Power BI. With that being said, just a bit of brief background around me. As I mentioned, my name is Leon Gordon. I'm a current Microsoft Data Platform MVP and also the Director of Analytics at a company called Onyx Data. So, just a brief moment to go through some of our sponsors here before we go ahead and move into our session. As I mentioned previously, my name is Leon Gordon. You can feel free to reach out and follow me on LinkedIn. My company website is onyxdata.co.uk. I'm also the chair and founder of the Microsoft Power BI UK user group and the Data DNA dataset visualization group. So please do feel free to connect. We would love to have you with us on those platforms. Now, with that being said, in today's session, an introduction to machine learning in Power BI, what will we cover today? So first and foremost, we'll take a brief look at what is machine learning, often referred to as ML, how we can benefit from machine learning within Power BI, how to create a machine learning model in Power BI Premium or Premium per User, often referred to as PPU, how to create a machine learning model in Power BI for free, before I hand over some more resources to continue learning after today's session. So with that being said, what is machine learning? Well, machine learning is a branch of artificial intelligence, often referred to as AI, that teaches computers to do what comes naturally to humans and animals, and that is to learn from experience. Machine learning algorithms use computational methods to learn information directly from data without relying on a predetermined equation as a model. So some of our key takeaways from this slide is that what we're looking to achieve utilizing machine learning is to enable the computer to learn from experience and also to learn information directly from data. Okay, so how can we benefit from machine learning within Power BI? Well, there are a lot of common scenarios that we can utilize, including real-time predictions, looking at customer churn analysis, customer leads and conversion, and to predict fraud. Within today's session, we're going to look at a specific business case, which is sales leads, okay? So companies that are looking to convert customer sales leads. So the problem we have is that with our fictional organisation here, they're spending approximately £3 million per year on purchasing leads. Now these leads, as we can see in this diagram here, then go through the sales funnel and decrease as time goes on, because obviously not every lead will convert into a sale. And in this scenario, this fictional company actually only has a 4.3% conversion rate. So with that being said, wouldn't it be great if we could optimize this lead flow and actually be able to see whether a lead is more likely to convert before we even purchase it? Ultimately, cutting down on the lead spend, because we'll only be purchasing the leads that fit within our needs, and hopefully converting more sales, because these leads, obviously based on machine learning, will be predicted to be positive buyers. So with that being said, let's just go over to our GitHub repo and we can take a look at the data that this fictional company has available. So we have two data sets, and let me just clear this download. We have two data sets which we're going to utilize. One is going to be our sales training CSV, which I'll just open up in a new screen. And we also have our prospective buyer CSV, which I'll just open up in the new screen. Okay, so hopefully once they have opened up, we'll first take a look at our sales training information. So this data set is data that's historic customer information, and we're going to utilize this data to be able to run our training on our machine learning model. Now, there are some common characteristics within this data set. So for each of our historical customers, we have an age, their marital status, their gender, their yearly income, the total amount of children, the number of children at home, the education, occupation, whether they're a house owner or not, the number of cars owned, their state province code, and their postal code. Now, finally, our most important column here is our Boolean flag to understand whether this customer was a buyer with us or whether they were not. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is the sales training CSV that we're going to utilize to train our machine learning model. Now, with that being said, we also have our prospective buyer data set. Now, this information is the leads that we are purchasing as our organization. So we can tell that it's come from a transactional system because we have a prospective buyer key and an alternate key. But we also have additional information like the customer's first and last name. And then we have common attributes like age, marital status, gender, yearly income, the total amount of children, the number of those children that are at home, education, occupation, whether they're a house owner or not, the number of cars owned, the city, the state province code, and ultimately the postal code. Now, as I mentioned, as this information is newly presented leads, we haven't actively brought or not been able to convert this lead into a buyer, which is why we do not have our buyer flag here. So with this being said, this is our lead data that we're going to look to push through our machine learning model to understand which ones of these leads are likely to convert based on historic information. So with that being said, let's head over to Power BI and look at how we can do this in Premium. So I'm just going to go over to my Premium per user workspace, which is Sandbox. And it is worthwhile noting that we're going to try and get quite a lot of information into a short space of time here. So we are going to fly through this at pace and gloss over some of the technical aspects due to this being an introductory session. So once you're in your Premium or Premium per user workspace, you want to go ahead and select New. And we're going to go ahead and select a new data flow. Okay. On my screen I have to do this twice, unfortunately. It may select the first time for you. So once we've done that, we'll be presented with a Power BI UI that allows us to start creating our workflow. Now, first and foremost, what we want to do is define our new tables so we can ingest our training and lead data sets into our data flow. So we go ahead and select Add New Tables. And then we're presented with the Power Query Online wizard as such, where we can go ahead and select our data source. Now in this example, we want to go ahead and select text CSV, and we're going to link to a file based on the URL. So let's just head back over to our GitHub repository that we opened earlier with our sales training CSV. Go ahead and look at the raw version of this file, and we're going to go ahead and copy out that URL. Head back over to Power Query Wizard and paste that in before selecting Next. Okay. Now in the background, that will just pass the data set and start to give us back suggestions, and obviously it will preview the first 200 rows of data and then define the column data types as we can see here based on those 200 rows. Now in this scenario we can see that the first row has been correctly identified as headers and all of the data types are correct, so we can go ahead and move forward without making any transformations to the data. So let's just go ahead and save and close. Now as we've just created a new entity within the data flow, Power BI will ask us if we want to go ahead and set a refresh or a refresh schedule. In this instance we don't want to, as it's outside of the scope for the purposes of this demo, and we'll just give a brief name to this data flow as well. Let's call it ML intro. Let's go ahead and save. As I mentioned, we'll be prompted to refresh or set a refresh schedule, which we're not going to do for the purposes of this demonstration. So we now have our sales training data ingested into our data flow, and let's go ahead and add in by selecting Add Tables up here on the right, and let's go ahead and add in our lead information. So again, we're going to follow exactly the same process in terms of importing a text CSV. We're going to go back across to our GitHub repo, to our prospective buyer CSV, go ahead and get the raw version, select that URL and copy that, and then paste this back into our connection settings. Now, same as previously, Power BI Power Query Online will go away and pass that information and present back to us the suggestions for the column types, as we can see here, for the column data types based on the first 200 rows. Once again, in this scenario, everything is as expected, so we can go ahead and save and close without any further transformations. And again, we'll be prompted whether we would like to refresh or set a refresh schedule for this entity as well. In this scenario, as I mentioned previously, it's not something we want to do. So we can go ahead, and we now have our sales training data set and our prospective buyer, so our lead information, now available to us within the data flow. So we can go ahead and look to start to build out our machine learning model. Okay, so once we've selected machine learning models at the top here, we'll be presented with a nice UI and wizard walkthrough in terms of what we're going to be doing next. So in our first scenario, we're going to create and train our model. So in this example, we're going to look to select our training data. We're going to choose a model type, and then we're going to train the model. After that's been completed, we'll look to move on to how we can improve that machine learning model by iterating and retraining, and then we'll apply that model, as I mentioned, to our lead information to be able to have a prediction on whether those leads will become buyers or not. So let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, we'll be asked what we want to predict. Now in this scenario, we know that we want to predict whether an individual is going to be a buyer or not. So let's go ahead and select our sales training data for our table, and the outcome column that we're interested in is our buyer column. Okay, so let's go ahead and select next, and then we'll be asked to choose a model. Now once again, in the background, Power BI is parsing that information and looking to suggest a model for us. Now in this scenario, we've been suggested the binary prediction model, which is in fact a correct prediction for what we want to do in this scenario, because as we can see here at the bottom, it predicts whether or not an outcome will be achieved. And some examples of this include determining the likelihood of a sales lead converting, or the probability of a customer responding to a marketing campaign. So if that wasn't the correct suggestion, then we could go ahead and try and select a different model here. Okay, now Power BI Premium or Premium per user gives us a couple of different types of machine learning models to choose from, so classification or regression. Now under classification, we have the scenario which we have currently, which is binary prediction, or we could also have general classification, which distinguishes between 3 or more outcomes. So this is likely utilized for classifying credit card applicants into groups of those who have good, bad credit, and those that require further analysis. Similarly, for regression, we have a regression model which is used to estimate a numeric value. Now, this can be utilized for estimating house prices in a market based on regional factors. Now, as we know, Power BI did correctly suggest the binary prediction model, so let's go ahead and select that. So what we want to do is choose a target outcome. So we're most interested in our buyer becoming a yes, so a positive prediction for a buyer. So once this machine learning model has indeed run, we would like to, if we get a match for what the prediction is a buyer, let's label that as buyer. And if we get a mismatch, then let's label that as not buyer. So let's go ahead and select next. Okay. And then once again in the background, Power BI within the service will be parsing our data set to try and recommend to us which columns or attributes within the data set. So these are commonly referred to in machine learning as features, which ones it believes has a low correlation or a high correlation with the outcome of a buyer. So in this scenario, Power BI has said that marital status, gender, number of children at home, education, etc. all have a low correlation with buyer. So the suggestion is not to select these columns. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I will select these columns just so you can see further down the line in the report why Power BI has suggested not to select these columns. So let's go ahead and select next. And then we can name and train our model. So let's call this model ML_intro. Now generally, if you were using this for production purposes or alongside other devs or business stakeholders, you would enter a description here because it's always best practice to inform people what the purpose of the model is. We would then move on to start to look at the training time. Now, whenever I'm either training or trying to practice or learn something, obviously the longer that I spend on that task, the more that it resonates and the more that it starts to sink in. Now, that is the same for machine learning models. So generally, you want to be able to train your model for longer periods of time to ensure that you get more accurate results. Now for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll put this down to the lowest possible threshold, which is 5 minutes, but you can also go all the way up to 360 minutes. So Power BI also tells us what will happen next. So in the background, there'll be a statistically significant sample of data being used to train the model. It will take 80% worth of the underlying data set to use to train. It will then test that prediction on the remaining 20% of data within the data set, and then give us a prediction accuracy report after that fact as well. So let's go ahead and select Save and Train. Now in the background, this will go ahead, and as we can see here, for ML_intro, we can see that it's started to refresh that data flow and run the machine learning model as well. Now because this will take 5 minutes or so, I'm just going to move ahead with a previously prepared version of this data flow, so we can see how that would look moving forward. So let's go ahead and select our ML webinar deployed data flow, and just pick it back up from where we would have left off. So within our machine learning model, we can see that this is now being trained by the status over here, and let's go ahead and take a look at the training report. Okay. Now once again, I will gloss over some aspects of the training report, because again, some of it far outweighs the scope of today's session, and this is more of an art of the possible as opposed to a technical deep dive. So some of the key aspects that we're going to be interested in terms of this training report, just once it loads, and I'll just go back to our first tab, which is our model performance. Okay, excellent. As I mentioned, we're interested in the model performance aspect of the training report. So here it gives us a brief amount of information on how the model was evaluated. So this is the amount of records or rows of the data set that we used for testing on the predicted outcomes. We also get the model performance. So this is a figure that's the area under the curve, or the AUC. Again, probably out of the scope of today's session. As I mentioned previously, within our data set we had our features, which Power BI have recommended which ones had a low or high correlation in terms of the output of a buyer. Now we can see here the top predictors by influence are age, marital status, total children and postal code, followed by those that Power BI did mention to us had a low correlation with buyer and suggested that these should not be included within the dataset. So hopefully we can see that in a bit more detail here. Now as we go in, we can click and select our age feature, and we'll see, just based on this, a bit of a breakdown in terms of how that looks within our dataset. So for our leads, generally a customer that becomes a buyer is generally over 46 years old and less, or between the ages of 46 and 59. Similarly, the marital status that we tend to find our buyers being is going to be single, as we'll see here, and so on and so forth as we go throughout the features. Now with that being said, we can just close this graphic here and continue on with our report. Now another key area of interest here is the precision and recall. So as we can see within this top left hand column here, the amount of predicted buyers by our data set, by our machine learning model, which were actual buyers, is 704. Now the incorrect predictions, so those predicted buyers which were actually not a buyer, is also quite high in 859. And we don't have any positives or false positives for predicted non-buyers. Now as we can see, by increasing the precision, these numbers will be affected. So let's just wait for that to load. And now we can see that within our machine learning model, those that are predicted buyers, which were actually buyers, so positives, it is actually now become higher than the false positives within the predicted buyer column. And similarly, for our predicted non-buyers, our positive positives, where actual non-buyers are being correctly predicted, is also now higher. And our actual non-buyers, which are false positives, is actually quite higher as well. So I would say that in terms of precision and recall, again, this would probably be more of an advanced session to go into this in a bit more detail, but it's very keen to understand this. Now, generally, I would say to set this at 0.5 as a starting point, and then adjust as you see fit throughout your model as well. So with that being said, let's leave that at 0.5 and jump onto the accuracy report tab of our report. Again, we're going to gloss over some of the more technical aspects in terms of the area under the ROC curve value, and we're just going to take a look at the report being generated here that is showing us in the teal colour what the ideal line for the machine learning model accuracy is, and also in the black here, the black dotted line, what would be a random guess. Now, as we can see that our model's actual performance falls in between a random guess and what the ideal is. So again, you would need to tweak these as you see fit moving forward. Now, in terms of the training details tab, again, Power BI would just give us a bit more information on how the model was trained. So this is the amount of sample rows within the model, the training rows, the amount of iterations being run. So as I mentioned previously, the longer that you train the model for, the more iterations that will run. And again, over time, this will give more accurate results as well. We just go into a bit more detail around the model quality, and then again into some more detail around the features being selected, their data types, and also the final parameters that were being utilized by the machine learning model. So with that being said, there is a wealth of information within this report, but just as a high level overview, those are some of the key features that you would need to take out. Now, with that being said, what we would go ahead and do at this point, sorry, if I just go back into the report, is we would go ahead and apply the model. Now, as I mentioned, this is a previously deployed version, so I won't follow this all the way through. But what we're looking to do at this point is apply these predictions to our lead data. So at this moment in time, we have ran our machine learning model on our test information. It has gone ahead and made predictions based on the features or the columns and attributes that we've given to that model. And now we want to apply this to our lead data to start to get predictions back. So we want to select our prospective buyer table. So remember, this is our leads information. And the output column that we want to have is going to be called outcome, and our threshold will remain the same at 0.5. Now, on your end, if you're following along with this at home, go ahead and select save and apply. But from my perspective, I'll just cancel this as it has already previously been applied. So at this moment in time, we can now go back to our tables within the data flows, and we can see that we now have some additional information. So we have our buyer prediction training data. So this is the training information that was used within the machine learning model. We then have our buyer prediction testing data. So this is at 20% of the data set, which was used to test. And then we have two new tables, which are the ones of most interest to us. So this is our prospective buyer enriched buyer prediction table. Now this holds our newly predicted column associated with our lead data. And then we also have some explanations on why the model made these predictions. So at this moment in time, we've run our fully end-to-end machine learning model, and we can now go into Power BI Desktop, and I'll just go ahead and start a new report. And start to bring this information in based on how we can start to give this out to some of our sales professionals to go ahead and start calling these leads. Okay. So with this being said, as I mentioned, we're going to start a new Power BI desktop report. Now we'll be welcomed with the familiar UI wizard in terms of getting data. And what we want to do is go ahead and select Get Data. Now, obviously, this has been created within a data flow within the Power BI service. So once we're greeted with our Get Data wizard, we will go ahead and select our Power BI workspace, which we know is our sandbox environment, and also our data flow as our connector. So we just type in data flows here. We want Power BI data flows, and let's go ahead and connect. Okay. And we'll just establish our connection to Power BI data flows. Excellent. So we want our sandbox workspace. Now we know we're going to utilize our previously deployed version. And as I mentioned previously, the table that we're most interested in now is our prospective buyer enriched buyer prediction data. So let's go ahead and look to see if we want to make any transformations to that. So remember, this is our lead information that we previously hadn't seen before. Okay. And if we take a look at the underlying data within Power Query, we can see that we have all of the familiar columns. But if we scroll all the way down to the right, we now have some additional columns. Okay, so we have the buyer prediction outcome, which is our prediction that we're most interested in. We have the prediction score, so this is the weighting of how likely this prediction is to be. And then we also have the prediction explanation and also the prediction explanation index. Now we're not too interested in these two columns at the end for our reporting purposes. Our columns of interest really is prediction outcome and the prediction score. So let's go ahead and close and apply. And it will just refresh that table to pull it in. And then we can go ahead and start to build out our report based on our machine learning model predictions. So remember, our business case here was to identify leads that potentially will become buyers for us in the future, and weed out any leads that we don't think is going to become a buyer for us in the future. So let's go ahead and take a look at our fields. Now, for the purposes of this report, the fields that we're going to be most interested in. Once we've loaded. Now, for this particular report, the fields that we're going to be most interested in is going to be the first name, also the last name, and then we want to see their outcome. So remember, we want to have our prediction, so our buyer prediction outcome, and also the prediction score, so the weighting behind the score. Let's go ahead and open this up so it's a bit visible. Okay. And then let's put in a rudimentary filter as well. Here, so let's go to that. Okay, so what we can see here is all of our leads, their outcome, and the weighting behind that. So if we wanted to see all of the leads which had been predicted by our machine learning model that they potentially will be buyers, we can do that by filtering down to true. And we can also then start to sort those by the weighting as well, in terms of how accurate they believe that prediction will be. And alternatively, if we wanted to weed out the leads that potentially we don't believe would be buyers based on our historic information and the prediction, then we can do that also. So here we've just seen how we can run a machine learning model to predict leads, lead conversion end to end using Power BI, either premium or premium per user. And that brings us to the end of our first demo. Excellent, that's great. So we've just done an end-to-end demo of how we can utilize machine learning models for lead conversion prediction within Power BI, premium or premium per user. But what about if we don't have premium or premium per user? So how can we use machine learning in Power BI for free? Well, in the next scenario, we're going to make the machine learn. So don't worry, no machines were actually harmed in the making of this webinar, but we're going to look to utilize how we can do this for free within Power BI using some alternative tools. Okay, so with that being said, we're going to utilize Anaconda. Now, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Anaconda. It's an open source individual distribution, which is probably the easiest way to perform Python or data science and machine learning on a single machine. As I mentioned, it's freely available. And also we're going to utilize a Python library known as PyCaret, which is an open source low-code machine learning library in Python that allows you to go from preparing your data to deploying your model within minutes. So with that being said, let's go ahead and head back into the second and final demo. Okay, so you may need to go ahead and get the Microsoft C++ build tools to ensure that all of the required libraries are installed on your computer. And if you've already done that, then you can head over to the Anaconda website and download the individual edition for free. So once you've downloaded that edition, then you can go ahead, just search on your computer for Anaconda. As I mentioned, on this box we're already set up and installed. But you'd go ahead and load the Anaconda command prompt. Now, as you can see here, you'll be loaded into the base environment for Anaconda. What I recommend that you do is create, obviously, an individual environment as per your needs. So to do this, you would go ahead and use the command activate, and in this example I'm going to use the environment name data science _UG. Now I'll go ahead and click enter on that, and as we can see, we've now gone ahead and spun up a new environment, which in this example is called data science _UG. Now this environment is a clean Python environment, and so we're going to need to install some of our tools. So let's go ahead and use the Anaconda command, and we're going to install pip. Now for those of you familiar with Python, pip is a library that allows us to install other libraries with fairly relative ease. Now as I mentioned, this environment is already spun up and has all of the necessary packages, so we'll probably go through slightly faster than on your environment. So once we have pip installed, we can then use the pip command to go ahead and install PyCaret. Okay, so let's go ahead and install PyCaret. And then again, as I mentioned, this is already installed within the system, so we'll just fly through this, whereby in your scenario this might take slightly longer. Okay. So with that being done, we now have our Python environment and our libraries installed necessary to be utilized within Power BI. But Power BI is not aware of these libraries as of yet. So let's go ahead and go to our file within Power BI. Go ahead to Options and Settings. Now go to Options, and once the options have loaded, we'll be looking to go into our Global section, where here we can see Python scripting. Now all we need to do here is just make Power BI aware of where our new Python environment is. So in detected Python home directories, we'll set this to other, and then we'll go ahead and set our Python home directory to your new environment. Okay. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and select OK, and that will just load that environment up for you. Right, so let's go ahead and select a new Power BI report, and what we're going to do is recreate what we've just done in Power BI Premium or Premium per user, and we're going to do it in Power BI Desktop utilizing PyCaret. Okay, so once we have our new report loaded, then as we did previously, we need to go back and get the raw files to be able to be ingested into Power BI. So let's go ahead and select the raw version of our sales training data. And come back over to our desktop. Now we have our new file. Let's go ahead and select Get Data. Now, as I mentioned, we are going to run through this at pace because of the time allowances for today, and gloss over some of the more technical aspects. So what we want to do within Power BI Desktop is go ahead and select Get Data. Okay. Now in this scenario, we actually want to use the web connector as opposed to text CSV. So let's go ahead and use the web connector. We have our URLs, we can copy and paste that in here for our sales training information. Okay. And in this scenario, we do need to transform our data because Power Query within the desktop has not correctly defined our headers. And what I will actually probably do here in an effort to save time is go ahead and move on to a version that we've previously put in place so we can walk through some of the steps at pace. Okay, so this is a previously created demo version whereby we've ingested both our sales training data and also our lead information as well. And we can just go ahead and see some of the steps here. So as we say, we've gone to our source, we've promoted our headers, so made our first row column headers. Then we've gone through and adjusted our data types as well. Now at this stage, this is when we can start to integrate Python into Power BI. So to do so, we can go to the transform menu item, and we can just go ahead and select run Python script. Okay. Once you've done that, you'll be presented with a splash screen, which allows you to start inputting your Python script. Now, in this scenario, we do have all of the Python scripts that we're using available on the GitHub, so you can just follow through using 1, 2, 3, and 4. So our first one will be number 1. So this script here we are using to encode and impute our data set. So let's just Control A, Control C, and we can pull that across into our PyCaret demo and paste that in. Now what we can see here is that once we've utilized this script, we're then presented with all of the data frames that are available from within that script. Now the one that we're interested in is df imputed, so we'll go ahead and select this table and we'll be presented with our next screen. Now what you'll notice here is that we've had to encode our values. So for example, gender, rather than being male and female in this scenario, has now become 1.0 and 0.0. Similarly for marital status, what was previously single and married is now 0.0 and 1.0. Now we need to do this to our underlying data to enable it to be passed through our PyCaret classification module and been able to have predictions run on it. So with that being the case, we can go ahead and get ready to run our next Python script. Okay, so select up here, and once again you'll be presented with your run Python script. Now in this example, we can just go back to our GitHub repo. And it's back to the root of our repo. And we can go ahead and select train dataset for ml.py. Okay. Now again, you can go and get the raw version and just copy this script out and pull it back into Power BI desktop for your run Python script. Just copy and paste it in there. Now in this example, what we're doing is exactly what we did using AutoML. So we're building out our machine learning model in Python and basically running our predictions based on the underlying data set that we're passing through. So this is our historical customers, and whether they're a buyer or not, we're looking to predict whether that's actually true or not. So when you press OK, it will go ahead and run this script. Now we know that this might take a bit of time due to the fact that we were able to adjust the AutoML within the Power BI work surface down to 5 minutes. And so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and cancel this because we have already previously run this. So once you get to this scenario, again, you'll be presented with all the data frames from within that script. Now the one that we're interested in is predictions. Okay, so you go ahead and select your table to expand that, and you'll be presented with the information from our final applied step here. So let's go ahead and scroll all the way across to the right. Okay, and you'll notice that we now have some additional columns. So we have our buyer column, which already existed, but we now have a label and a score. So this is now the label based on the machine learning model, so the prediction, and the scoring behind that, very similarly to how we did within AutoML using Power BI Premium or Premium per user. So that's fantastic. At this stage, our machine learning model has now correctly run and obviously based its predictions on the underlying data set. Now, one thing to note is that the Python script, the last Python script, will actually export what's called a pickle file. Now, this pickle file actually holds all of the object metadata for our machine learning model, and we need to utilize this on our lead information to be able to run this predictions. So again, we would have ingested our prospective buyer data set using the web connector, and again we would have gone ahead and promoted our headers, so use our first row as column headers, and at that point once again we need to get this data set encoded ready to be run through our machine learning model. So once you're at this stage, you can go ahead and select run Python script, to where you'll be presented with the now familiar UI to put in your Python script. So this is our third Python script, so we can go back to our GitHub repo and go ahead and select the third Python script, which is to impute the new data set for predictions. Now once this loads, once again just get the raw version, copy and paste this script into your run Python script within Power BI, okay, and you can hit OK. Now what that will do, exactly the same as previously, is present you with all of the data frames from that script, and the one that we're interested in is df_imputed. So go ahead and select that table to expand the results of that script, and once again we can see that all of our values are now being encoded as we go through, ready for the machine learning model to be run within it. So at this point you can go ahead and run the Python script, which again will present you with our final Python script and our smallest Python script, but also the one that arguably does the most relevant bit. So again, this script is available for you on the repo under number 4, and it's called pipe dataset for training. So go ahead and copy and paste that out using the raw version, and then you'll have this readily available. Now what we're doing here is using our PyCaret library. We're using our pickle object file, so remember this is the metadata from our machine learning model, and we're going to run the predictions on our lead data. So go ahead and select OK, and that will just run in the background. It may take a little bit of time when you do it. And we have our final data frames. Again, the one we're interested in is predictions, so go ahead and select table here to expand that, and then you'll finally be presented with all of your lead information, but we now have the additional 2 columns that we were able to get in premium and premium per user earlier. So this is our label, which is our prediction, and we also have our score. Now for the purposes of this, for the demo, we've done a rough and dirty version. As we can see, all of our values here are encoded. So what I've done is just duplicate this data set as Prospective Buyer 2, and just joined these data sets together on the primary key, so that I can actually give you back the first name and last name as opposed to encoded values. So you would go ahead and select close and apply. That would apply all of your changes to the model. Okay. And then this will just load back for us. Now let me just delete these so that we've got a clean slate. And very similarly to how we did when we imported data from the data flow, we can go ahead and we're going to use our duplicated table here to get our first name and last name without them being encoded values. Okay. Just make it bigger. And we can also then go ahead and get our predictions from our imputed data set. Okay, so we know this is going to be label and also score columns. Okay. And then once again we can have our rudimentary filter, which is the label, which is whether this is going to be a true prediction or a false prediction for it to be a buyer. So if we just select label 1, which is those leads that the machine learning model has identified as being buyers, and once again we can go ahead and sort that information based on the accuracy of that prediction. And once again, alternatively, we can go ahead and select those which are false, so defined by our machine learning model as not being buyers. Okay, so within that demo we've seen how we can also run machine learning models for sales lead prediction for Power BI Desktop using Python and PyCaret. So let's just jump back into our presentation. Okay, so we now have a vision, and it's up to you to take this to the next level. So you can start to use outlier detection, maybe topic distribution, or even association rule mining. Okay, and here's some resources you can take away to go and do that. I would thoroughly recommend to you extending Power BI with Python and R by fellow MVP and my friend Luca Zavarella. And alternatively, you have websites available to you like kdnuggets.com, towardsdatascience.com, and obviously you have anaconda.com and some documentation available from Microsoft on AutoML also. So I'd like to thank you all for your time and ask if you have any questions. And finally, you can go ahead and use the QR code in the top left-hand section of this screen to be entered into a prize draw and raffle following on from this session. So thank you once again, everybody, for joining us at the Global AI Bootcamp. It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you. Stay safe.